Testing with the Canon EOS R5 firmware 1.6 continues. Today we look at 8K oversampled 4K, otherwise known as 4K HQ or 4K Fine, the most detailed video resolution on a stills hybrid camera under $4,000. Results coming up, but first I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors. This video is part of my week-long look at the firmware update for the Canon EOS R5 firmware 1.6, and it provides a new enhancement or capability, if you prefer, to the heat management system. If we look at Chapter 8, the very last one in the Movie tab, we can see that Canon provides auto power off temp mode, and we now have standard and high, and that wasn't there before. What this really does is it increases, well, the tolerances that the camera can tolerate when recording video. And all week long I've been testing it. I tested out at 60 degrees on firmware 1.1, and we were able to record unlimited 8K, 4K 120, 4K oversampled 8K, 4K 60, you name it, as long as the ambient temperature was 60 degrees or less. With firmware 1.6, I tested 70 degrees here in the studio, and basically every mode but 4K 120 could record indefinitely. And then yesterday, I started testing at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. What we noticed is, well, 8K unlimited recording didn't quite happen. We got to about 1.2 terabytes of video, and that's 8K raw at 30 frames per second, before the camera shut down and overheated, but still that gave you about 69 minutes and 15 seconds of record time. It's pretty impressive. But what I really was looking forward to seeing is how the 8K oversampled video mode would work. And what we're talking about is 4K HQ, or as you see in the camera display, calls it 4K Fine. And so that's what I did today. So earlier this morning, I got everything outside, placed by the shed, so that way, as the sun started to move over, it would keep all the equipment in the shade. And I think that's very important. We don't want to skew the results by the sun hitting the camera body, and it shifts everything around. So the ambient temperature when I started filming was 79 degrees. I didn't want to wait till it got to 80 degrees because, well, at that point at my lunch break, it was supposed to thunder, it was supposed to rain and lightning, and I thought, let's see if we can get all this testing done early in the morning. Well, not early in the morning, but earlier in the morning, so that way I could get you the results early enough in the day. And here's what happened. After recording for about, I think it was a minute or two, the camera just got an error 77. An error 77. Now, I didn't know what was causing this. I wasn't using batteries. I was powering it from the mains once again. But because of the weather was kind of in flux, I thought, well, let's remove that out of the equation. Let's go back to batteries while the weather's in question. And I also thought, well, this could also be a potential problem with storage if I was having problems with storage. So I switched out the 2 terabyte Angelbird CF Express card for the 1 terabyte. I have no data indicating whether it was the power, whether it was storage or not. It could have been either one of those two or some other issue. So I let the camera cool down, and then I set up again in a different location. So I changed out the power, I changed out the battery, and I started to record, and everything went well, right? Well, no, not exactly, because as I suspected, it did open up the skies. It started raining really heavy, as you'll see in the video coming up shortly. So I had to use an umbrella to keep the cameras dry. And it was just absolutely crazy. So let me talk about the temperature. The temperature when I first started recording was 79 degrees, and it very quickly went to 80, 81, and then up to 82 degrees. I would say for most of the testing, the temperature was right around 80, 81 degrees. And just before the heavens opened up, it got up to 82 degrees. And while it was raining, the temperature dropped quite a bit, down to about 73 degrees Fahrenheit, but only for a very short period of time before it started coming up again. I would say for the bulk of this video shoot, it was right around 80, 81 degrees, but the humidity was all over the place. When I first started shooting, I think it was around 50, 53 degrees, not 53 degrees, 50, 53%. But when it started to rain, of course, it really went crazy. It went up to 60+%. And once it was raining, I didn't record any figures because I didn't want to keep my equipment wet. I was there with the umbrella holding things in place. So the weather was all over the place, but obviously you want to get to the results. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this short video clip. Cue the music. And this is the footage I captured shooting 4K HQ or 4K Fine, the 8K oversampled 4K video mode. This was a very good test, and this was a very positive test. The temperature got up to 82 degrees, and yet the Canon EOS R5 kept recording and recording and recording. And yes, I did have to change batteries, but I was able to do that within about 2 to 4 seconds. And when I got to 2 hours and 10 minutes, there was no sign of that white overheat icon. I would assume that I could have kept recording and recording and recording, and I was tempted to, but then the weather started to change again. And right after, I was planning on recording 4K 60, but the weather was really, the temperature range was all over the place, the humidity was all over the place. It wasn't really a good test, so I didn't record 4K 60. So unfortunately, all I can bring to you is the 4K HQ results, and I was quite impressed. And yes, I did have to replace a battery, and yes, I did bump the tripod a few times. I had some other issues, and yes, the humidity was all over the place. But I think the takeaway here is while the humidity was all over the place, it was considerably higher than the previous tests I've done. So I wouldn't say that the humidity made things a little bit better for the testing. If anything, it made things a little bit more difficult. And as far as the temperature goes, yeah, right around 79 to 82 degrees for about good 2 hours. And then maybe for the last 10, 15 minutes, it was right around 73 degrees. But this is the amazing thing of this new firmware update. This new heat management system allowing us to record with that auto power off temp set to, well, high. And things do get hot. But you know, I was just thinking back to when I first got my Canon EOS R5, and actually to a couple of weeks before that. You see, it started to come out, leaked information from European retailers saying that Canon EOS R5 overheats. And well, I was talking to my friend Patrick at Downtown Camera, and he called me up, says, "You ready to make your purchase?" And I said, well, give me till Monday. I wanted to look into this. The last thing I wanted to do is drop $6,000 on a new camera that was going to overheat in all the modes I wanted it to. Well, over the weekend, I decided to make the purchase. I figured if it does overheat and cause problems, you guys are going to want to know about it. And I bought the camera, and I don't regret it, but that first firmware, 1.0, it did provide challenges. Shooting in 8K for any length of time was a problem. Shooting clips wasn't a problem. But if you were shooting stills and you're playing with the camera, shooting with it as you would normally do for about half an hour to an hour, you might switch over to the 8K video mode, 8K oversample 4K, 4K 120, or even 4K 60. And guess what? You might have 0 minutes left of record time, so it was frustrating. When they released firmware 1.1.0, they started to take into account ambient temperature. So if you put this thing in a fridge in a studio environment like mine here, where it's around 68 degrees, it would take that into account to its algorithm, and it would record a whole lot longer. And what I noticed is when the temperatures drop below 60 degrees, which in Canada is a good 8 months of the year, I essentially had unlimited recording. So it worked for me, great for Simon, right? But for anybody else who lived in Florida, Texas, Algeria, Africa, or other parts of the world where it gets very hot most of the year, the tropics, the subtropics, well, the R5 is a camera I certainly didn't recommend people pick up, because if you're shooting stills, great, but if you wanted it for video, there are certainly better cameras. Well, with this new firmware update, firmware 1.6, things have significantly changed. And yes, you do have to be concerned with the material sciences. I don't have any data. I just have a concern, and I know how materials work at certain temperatures with this rapid cooling and heating. But I'm pretty sure that Canon has spent the last few years looking at how they could adjust these tolerances so it wouldn't degrade the camera, so it wouldn't cause the camera to fail within a year, 2 years, or even 3 years, within a time period that would get people very upset and create a worse public affairs situation than, well, releasing the camera back at firmware 1.0, where it overheated after a couple of minutes, even if you stuck it into a freezer. Those situations did happen, although it overheated after a couple of minutes if you had been using it as a camera taking stills. Wow. I just kind of reflected over the last couple of videos, and with the comments, with you guys talking to me about how the Canon R5 Today is so very different from the camera that I bought 2 years ago. Sure, heat management has gotten a whole lot better, and I still keep mine on standard mode, but to have that high sensitivity mode for those jobs where you need it, wow, I think that's absolutely terrific. And of course, we get Canon Log 3, we've got Canon Log 1, we've got the Cinema Gamut color space. We've got a much improved autofocus system. We've got autofocus of vehicles, people, birds, cats, dogs. The only thing missing here is UFOs or UAPs, which would be very helpful in Skinwalker Ranch. I'm really happy with the level of upgrades, and I can't think of any other company that has provided this level of enhancement to their cameras post-release other than Panasonic's Lumix division, providing all sorts of incredible features such as waveforms, vector scopes, and all sorts of other things. And yes, I think there's still room for improvement. Yes, that 30-minute record limit now just looks like, well, it's ugly. It's just in the way, and I keep bringing this up, and you all understand it's absolutely ridiculous. And yes, to have an exposure system that can lock on to the autofocus, and also to have options to not just force us into evaluative meeting and video modes, but to give us some of the options that we would get when you're shooting stills. You have evaluative, you have spot, you have partial, etc. I would like to see those in video, but still, where this camera is today, it is a very, very powerful camera. And I think if you live in the tropics or the subtropics, very hot areas, the R5 is a camera you should certainly look at. However, the summer isn't over here. We have some weather that's supposed to get up into the 90s next week, and hopefully the weather there is sustainable enough that I can get out there and shoot for a couple of hours, because I want to get out there the first hot day over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is something like 35 degrees Celsius. I want to get out there and I want to shoot in 8K oversample 4K. That's the mode I want to capture most of all. And if I have plenty of weather left, I'll shoot in 8K RAW at 30 frames per second. But wow, what an incredibly amazing firmware update this has turned out to be. When I first started filming with it, I was a little bit cautious with it. I was worried about overheating. And when I had that Error 77 this morning, the first thing I thought was, have I pushed my camera too much testing all these things? Have I created problems? Or have I created a problem for the storage? And well, those questions I'll have to answer later on. I'm going to keep using the same storage cards, keep using the same batteries. And if I do notice any problems, I'll certainly let you know in a follow-up video. But yeah, very interesting. So again, to cover off the plans I have for the future, when it gets over 90 degrees, I'm going to test more of these overheat modes. It's probably not going to get over 100 degrees this year. We're already at, what, July the 28th, and this is pretty well the hottest day of the year. Then the days start progressively getting cooler. The days have already started getting shorter. Our summer here is already starting to wind down. We have another month, August, where it tends to get pretty hot. But as we move through the weeks, if we don't get 100 degrees, I don't think we're really going to see it. And I'd like to give a shout out to the Def Director. Hopefully he can do some testing around 100 degrees. Or if you're watching and you live in Texas, Florida, or other places where it gets up to 100 degrees and you're not afraid of risking your Canon EOS R5, run some tests, let me know the results, tell me all the information about your camera, and I'll let everybody else on the channel know. I do want to cover off some of the settings with the camera, because some people said they tested it in the same temperature or less, and, well, they didn't get the same results. And granted, this is one single data set from one camera, and I understand that different people might have different results. My camera is also 2 years old. It's produced over 600 videos for YouTube, all at 4K, and some of them for many hours in length. The LCD is always out. I have it in low power standby mode. I set that to on. And what is really, really important too is I keep the camera elevated. It's also in a very cool area when I shoot a lot of these videos, but when I was shooting outside, again, it's on a tripod. There is some air. It's not stuck in an area where there's no airflow. And I do believe that makes a difference. For my testing of firmware 1.1.0, I did notice that airflow made a difference, even if, well, the wind speed was what we would consider to be negligible, between 1 to 5 miles or kilometers an hour. But I've certainly seen a huge improvement. Other settings on the camera, where possible, I use Canon Log 3 and Cinema Gamut. If I'm shooting RAW, obviously those aren't the settings I have set up. Autofocus is always on. Some of the other settings, let me see if I mention them in here, because sometimes I forget when I'm in front of the camera here. Yeah, that standby overheat low res on, the LCD out, and of course, when I'm normally shooting, and I'm not shooting a video like this, because if I'm shooting a 3-hour video outside, the LCD is always going to be on. But if I'm not shooting, I have the LCD automatically shut off after like the minimum amount, 15, 30 seconds, and also have the camera power off after, again, 15 or 30 seconds, something like that. And I find that will help preserve not only the battery, but allow me to record a whole lot longer. But I'm really interested because, like I said, some people who are watching my videos are saying at around 75 degrees, they only got about 30, 36 minutes of record time in 8K RAW, which is very different from what I'm seeing. I've done so many tests now with 8K raw at 30 frames per second. And the least amount of record time I got was at 80 degrees yesterday, and that was 69 minutes and 15 seconds. That's an awful lot of time. So I wonder, I do wonder, and again, not all cameras are created equal. Maybe if you're getting a really, really short amount of time, then maybe run some tests, reach out to Canon and see if maybe you have a problem. A friend of mine who runs another channel was having problems with Sony Alpha 1. I was trying to get some information from others out there that had Sony, and it looked like his definitely had an issue. It's had to go into repair twice. So it doesn't matter what camera you purchase from what manufacturer, there's going to be a certain percentage of units that are going to have issues. What I'm looking at is the overall market and what we're seeing with firmware 1.6, but wow, what an incredible firmware update. So for those of you that really wanted to push the camera, that live in hotter areas, it looks like firmware 1.6 has certainly answered your prayers. But again, I do want to caution you a little bit because the firmware has only been out for a week. And a lot of the videos I shoot, the long ones, I shoot in the studio downstairs. I'm using a Ninja 5 external recorder, which allows me to record for hours prior to firmware 1.6. So I'm never truly pushing the camera too much. But when I'm shooting outside at 80 degrees, 70 degrees, I'm definitely pushing the camera. And when I pull the storage out, the Angelbird CF Express card, so hot to the touch, you can burn yourself on them. The camera really gets super hot inside. But as I was speaking with another viewer just earlier this morning, depending on how these electronics are made, they can be built to handle 85 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Celsius, or even 150 degrees Celsius. Canon's not letting us know what temperature they're built for. They just tell us its operating range is from 0 to 40 degrees Celsius, or freezing up to, what is it? I'm getting mixed up with, now I'm getting mixed up on Fahrenheit, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I am still being a little bit cautious. I'm running mine in standard mode, and I'll open it up to high mode if I need to, but there's going to be plenty of other channels out there that are going to be testing in the Florida heat. Maybe Dan Watson's going to be testing. Other people testing in the Texas heat, testing in Malaysia, testing in Africa. And I really want to take a look at their results and to see over the coming months, because you can't properly test a firmware update like this in a week, even though I've done a tremendous amount of tests, and say, oh yeah, it's fine, we're not going to have any issues with it. Only time will tell. I don't even know how much time Canon has spent testing it. But if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, go ahead and click subscribe and choose all notifications. By choosing all notifications, as soon as I publish a video like this one here, you'll get notified by YouTube so you can stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, or the latest tests I do on the Canon EOS R5 firmware 1.6. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.